Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to take you on a little time travel journey today. We're looking at the completely fascinating pre-smartphone reality of everyday life. I want you to take a second and just mentally strip away all those digital conveniences sitting in your pocket right now. Seriously, pretend they don't exist. We're going to look at exactly how Americans navigated their world, solved everyday problems, and answered their burning questions way back, 3 decades ago. So, picture this. The year is 1995. You've got a question. Maybe you're wondering about the weather in Chicago for an upcoming trip. Or maybe you need a phone number for that new Italian place down the street. Maybe you want to dive into some obscure historical event. Or hey, maybe you're just standing in your driveway totally baffled, trying to figure out a weird noise coming from your car. Now today, you'd pull out your phone, open Google, and boom, highly accurate answer in literally 2 seconds. But in 1995, Google did not exist. I really want you to think about that. No Google search, no Wikipedia to instantly give you the summary of the Roman Empire, no YouTube tutorials showing you how to replace that exact car part, and absolutely zero smartphones to just hand you answers on the fly. Which brings us to the ultimate mystery we're unraveling in this explainer. Without that digital safety net, how did Americans actually find information? How did everyday people get stuff done? Okay, let's dive into this, because the answer is surprisingly fascinating, and honestly, it involves a whole lot more literal legwork than you might expect. Section 1. The physical search engines. Moving weight to find facts. And yeah, I'm using the word weight very literally here. Back in 95, getting knowledge wasn't about tapping a glass screen. It required physical effort. For millions of people, step 1 for finding information meant traveling to a physical building, the local library. And when you walk through those library doors, your best resource wasn't an algorithm. It was a real, living, breathing person. The 1995 librarian was basically a human search engine. They were absolute masters of their domain. They were surrounded by encyclopedias, newspapers, magazines, textbooks, the whole shebang. You couldn't just query a million pages on your own, right? So if you were stuck, you walked up and asked the librarian. They knew exactly where the information was hiding and which specific books would actually help you out. But again, you had to physically go there, talk to a human, and then physically track down the answer. And this brilliantly illustrates the somewhat tedious quest of trying to research things at home. See, back then, a lot of American families proudly owned sets of encyclopedias, like the Encyclopedia Britannica. These were massive. We're talking dozens of incredibly heavy volumes taking up an entire wall in your house. So say you wanted to learn about the Roman Empire. Step 1, you physically walk over and heave the giant R volume off the shelf. Step 2, you're flipping through physical paper pages in the index to find your topic. And step 3? Well, you just cross your fingers and hope the information is now dated. Printed encyclopedias were pretty much the gold standard for home research, but updating them, massive headache and super expensive to replace. If the fact you needed wasn't in there, well, you were out of luck and on to the next source. Section 2, offline networks and media. Connecting without the web. So we've talked about the heavy academic stuff, but what about everyday practical problems? How did Americans find local businesses, figure out what to buy, or just, catch up on the news? This comparison is honestly wild to think about now. Let's say you needed a plumber or a mechanic, an attorney, or just wanted to order a pizza in 1995. You reached for the yellow pages. These were enormous, brick-heavy telephone directories where businesses were sorted by category. So you'd look under restaurants for your pizza or electricians for a spark. And sitting right next to it was the white pages, which is how you found a person's home phone number. Today, instant digital search, done in a second. But back then, these massive paper books were the absolute lifeline of a community. They were the offline version of a search engine, and you had to do the literal heavy lifting to flip through thousands of tiny printed names. And if you needed specialized advice, Americans leaned heavily on a giant ecosystem of printed magazines. We're talking technology, cars, sports, fashion, business, science, travel, entertainment, you name it, there was a magazine for it. If you were getting into computers and wanted to know what desktop to buy, you went out and bought a computer magazine. Trying to fix your truck? You grabbed an automotive magazine. These things were absolutely packed with deep dive articles, product reviews, and tips. Long before you could just pull up a blog post or watch a review video, this stack of paper sitting on your coffee table was your specialized hub for knowledge. But the real defining reality of this era, waiting. You were always waiting for the morning edition. I really want to emphasize this point because today, our feeds refresh every, 3 seconds with breaking news from across the planet? In 1995, millions of Americans simply had to wait for the morning newspaper to hit their driveway to find out what happened yesterday. Local papers gave you community events, crime, and weather. National papers gave you the world. And television was exactly the same. You tuned into the morning shows or you waited for the evening newscast. If something big happened in the world, you turned on the TV and you waited for the broadcast. No swiping down to refresh, no instant updates. You just waited. Section 3. Navigating without GPS. The analog nightmare of driving. Let's talk about this completely lost art of navigation. Because getting somewhere you'd never been before was a totally different beast than it is today. Just contrast these two worlds for a second. Today, we've got instant GPS routing on our phones, real-time traffic dodging, and of course that very polite digital voice going recalculating route the second we miss a turn. In 1995, it was all paper maps and road atlases. Before you took a road trip, you would literally sit at your kitchen table, trace your finger along the paper, and pre-plan the whole route, writing down highway numbers and specific exits on a notepad. And if you messed up and got lost, your only recalculating option was to pull over at a random gas station, walk inside, and ask a complete stranger for directions. Literally, people actually had to rely on the geographic memory of a guy working the register at a gas station just to make it to a wedding on time. No way around it. Section 4. The early, slow internet. The dawn of digital search. By the late 90s, we start to see this huge transition. The World Wide Web was starting to grow rapidly, and things were about to change forever. Beep, screech, crackle. Honestly, if you were using the internet back then, you can probably hear this slide right now. People were getting online using desktop computers and dial-up connections. That unforgettable, mechanical, screeching sound of your modem tying up the home phone line, that was your gateway. And it was a gateway to a much, much simpler and painfully slower internet. You have to remember, there was no Google to organize all of this yet. Instead, you had these early competitors. People relied on services like Yahoo, Lycos, AltaVista, and Excite just to discover websites. Some of these were more like massive directories. Websites were manually sorted into categories that you could just sort of click through. Others gave you basic keyword searches. But honestly, finding exactly what you were looking for was a massive chore. It took so much time. You'd find yourself trying 5 different searches, swapping out keywords across 3 different search engines, and half the time, you just wouldn't find the answer at all. Now, one of the most memorable things to pop up during this era was Ask Jeeves. The idea was that instead of typing these clunky, robotic keywords, you could just ask a question in natural language. It was charmingly simple. You ask a question, and this little digital butler named Jeeves would try to go fetch the answer. But let's be super clear here. This was absolutely nothing like ChatGPT or modern AI. Not even close. You couldn't have a dynamic back-and-forth conversation, and it definitely wasn't synthesizing complex answers for you. It was really just a friendlier-looking interface slapped on top of a very unorganized, very early-stage internet. Section 5, the power of not knowing, a massive behavioral shift. So the crucial point here is that the biggest difference between 1995 and today wasn't actually the hardware or the tech itself. It was human behavior. People were completely used to the friction of looking things up, and more than that, they didn't expect an answer immediately. If someone turned to you at a party and asked, "Hey, what's the population of Japan?" and you didn't instinctively reach into your pocket to check, you might check a heavy encyclopedia when you got home. You might call a buddy or ask a teacher the next morning. You might even go to the library that weekend. Or, as was very often the case, you simply shrugged and said, "I don't know." And that was completely 100% normal. Life before Google wasn't necessarily better, and it wasn't necessarily worse. It just meant you had to accept the reality of not knowing things instantly. Information traveled through real, physical conversations. Sure, that meant rumors and misinformation could spread like wildfire, but it also meant that just waiting for an answer was a standard, accepted part of being alive. And let's look at how that built the reality we live in today. As the late 90s rolled on, the internet became more and more central to daily life. And then, in 1998, Google was founded. Over the next few years, Google fundamentally transformed absolutely everything we've just talked about. Overnight, almost. You didn't have to walk to the library, you didn't have to heave an encyclopedia off a shelf, and you didn't have to call a friend for trivia. Searching for things became fast, it became incredibly easy, and it became astonishingly accurate. Retrieving historical facts, finding the fastest driving route, or pulling up a how-to tutorial, it all became practically instantaneous. And that brings us to our final slide, and a question I really want to leave you with. Because of this massive shift, the primary question we ask ourselves on a daily basis completely flipped. It changed from where can I find this information to what should I search for? Today, it feels like almost every question in the history of humanity is only a few keystrokes away from being answered. We search for restaurants, we search for directions, we search for literally everything. But it really makes you wonder, now that we never have to admit I don't know, and we practically never have to wait, what do we lose when the journey to find an answer takes only a fraction of a second? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this gave you a brand new appreciation for the absolute magic of the information we have right at our fingertips today.